I'm Michelle Graves, your host on today's segment of The Power of Money. I'm glad to have you here. Now, at The Power of Money, we are interested in three things happening. First, we want you to get the necessary education so that you and your family can make the decisions that will impact positively on you in your financial life. The second thing is that you be empowered to prosper. I only want the best for you. And you can only get that if you have education and then the drive to make it happen. And the third thing that is so important to me is that you recognize that life is more than a journey and that you be energized so that you can begin to participate in the truly joyous experience of living. So here's to empowerment, here's to education, and here's to energy. I'm Michelle Graves, your host, Power of Money, and here we go. And here we go, and thank you for being a part of my world for the next hour on The Power of Money. And as always, I thank you for taking time to sit down and to learn some things, because information today is essential for you to make sound financial decisions for you and your family. Poor information, no information, lack of information can simply be devastating for families. I've seen it over the years. I've been in practice for over 40 years, and it never ceases to amaze me how people can get themselves in such a pickle because they don't understand how things go. So in line with that, I have invited back to the set a gentleman who has not been here in a little bit, and that's Attorney Michael J. Millonig out of Centerville, Ohio. His specialty is estate planning. His credentials are absolutely stellar. He is certified as an elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation. He is an OSBA board certified estate planning trust and probate specialist, and he carries designation CPA inactive. The reason I'm having him here today is first because I need to be updated, because things do change, which means you need to be updated in the area of estate planning. And before you say, that sounds boring and dry, not so. Trust me, I was at a funeral yesterday and of a beloved woman that I've known. She almost was 199 and a half, and believe me, as tight as she thought she had put things together, things just kind of began to unbuckle at the funeral, and she was gone. And I was like, not me. I already took care of this other stuff I don't know anything about. So today, Attorney Millonig is going to talk about first, on this first hour, estate planning for funerals and burial. This is essential. I had a funeral specialist on several months ago to talk about the whole issue of funeralization. But again, he was an insider from the industry, and therefore what he said and articulated was probably, in his mind, sound information, but consistent with what I'm about, which is a balanced approach and giving you information that can help you. I invited Mr. Millonig to come on, and he graciously consented. So we're going to talk about funerals, we're going to talk about burials, we're going to talk about some information in this show and the next show that I didn't even know. I'm telling you, everything changes. So have a seat. You may want to pass this on to your friends and family through YouTube, which we do air on. Also, he will give you, as a part of the interview, the website where you can go to and look up a lot of the information and questions that you would have. My respect for this man is very, very grounded. I've known him and actually took classes under him because he knows the business, and I don't know everything I need to know. I truly mean this. So I'm putting this out. Have a seat, and we're going to get on to the show. Today's topic is estate planning for funerals and burial. And Attorney Millonig, glad to having you here. Uh-oh, here we go. Having a few little production challenges this morning. But let's just get on into the base of the show itself, and that is what would make you as an attorney get involved with the funeral industry?
Well, that's one of the first things that happens. I got to kind of segue on what you just said. You said you had a funeral the other day. If someone passes away and we have family problems at the funeral home, that's a bad way to start off, because then we have to go to the lawyer and we have to start administering the estate, and we want people to get along and things go smoothly. So if we start off poorly, the funeral it's bad.
Not
so
good.
One of the things, and this is, I still say it's new, about 10 years ago Ohio passed a new statute providing for an estate planning document where you set out your funeral and burial instructions and name a representative to have authority, like a power of attorney, to make all those arrangements. So that's how I get involved in this process.
Okay, so your involvement actually is after death or as a part of estate planning?
Well, no, preferably beforehand, and we do the planning so people set out, they do all their estate planning, including planning for their funeral and burial arrangements.
Okay, right. So they come to you before they go to the funeral home?
Yes, yes.
My goodness gracious. We never learned it like that.
Yeah, and you don't even need to go to a funeral home. All you have to do is have a legal document where you set forth, these are my wishes and this is who I appoint to take care of all the other details.
Talk to me about that legal document, because frankly, that was fresh information for me. What is this document?
Well, it's called an appointment of representative for funeral and burial instructions, and there's two aspects to it. One is appointing the person, giving them legal authority to make arrangements, and then two, also putting in whatever wishes you have.
Okay, so that person, is there a order of appointment, like in terms of how, who?
Well, you can appoint whoever you want. If you, I think is maybe what you're thinking about. If you don't have one,
yes,
there's a default law, just like a will. If you don't have a will, the state has a will for you.
Yes, they do.
The default is generally if you pass away and you don't have this document, the person with the right, it's a big long list, but I'll tell you a little bit of it. The person with the right to make arrangements is your spouse.
Okay.
And that may or may not who you want. And then if you have no spouse, then it's your children. And if you have, 8 children, then it's they all have to vote.
Oh my goodness.
So if you have no children, then it goes back to your parents. And then again, if no parents, then goes to brothers and sisters and so on. So it kind of goes down the family tree. But the point is, you don't want to do that. You want to just name whoever's appropriate for you to make that decision.
But truthfully, Attorney Millonig, you and I both know that families many times do not see this particular aspect of the funeralization as critical. Mm-hmm. They just, a person dies, and the first order of the day is to go to a funeral home.
Right, right.
And to bring everybody with you.
Right, right.
Which is good, bad, not good?
Well, it's bad. The hard thing about it is, if you've done no planning and you have a loved one pass away, and there's some urgency, you have to start making arrangements, and you're upset and hurt, and you have all those feelings, mm-hmm. and then you have to make a major decision on what could be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Now think about it. If you go out and buy a car, what do? Well, you shop around.
You shop
don't
around,
you?
right?
You don't go buy a car in one afternoon. You spend time shopping around, but in the funeral situation, you really can't do that because you have mm-hmm. someone sitting there, body sitting there. You have to make a decision. So there's all this pressure and emotion, and it's difficult for people to make a good decision. And frankly, what happens, they end up spending a lot of money.
Okay, because they don't understand.
Yeah. Well, and they just don't have time. They're not educated to know what to do and how to do it, and it's emotional. And when they're sitting in the funeral home, they tend to get pressured a little bit, and someone obviously wants to sell them something, and so they get these packages, and they also feel like they don't want to be cheap, and they don't if they feel like they're cheap, they're not. Some people feel like, well, they're not doing the right thing for their loved one.
Well, I think that it gets messy. It really gets messy. I mean, at the point where you're looking at a person who has died, and you've got to get things consummated. I mean, typically if they die in a facility, the facility is going to have somebody pick the body up.
Right. Well, it depends where you are. And that's part of the problem is if you're in a hospital, they have a cooling or freezer unit.
Right.
Take
Yeah,
people.
they do.
But if you're in a nursing home or at home, someone has to pick the body up, and that's usually going to be a funeral home.
Right.
So you're right away. You
So
have
there
to
you
incur an
are.
expense.
There
Right.
you are, because they are going to listen, viewers. The funeral industry is a business, and it's one that I know rather well. But there's no free anything. They will gladly come and pick up the deceased, but there is a charge for them coming to pick it up, and then there's a charge for them storing it.
Right, right. And then if you decide maybe you don't want that funeral home, well, now you're in a little bit of a pickle because they're going to charge to transport the body.
It to another funeral
So again,
home.
things happen quickly, which is why if you've done your planning ahead of time, you're going to be much better able to deal with that.
I absolutely think you're right, because I was trying to think in a normal and typical situation, the person dies, either hospital or nursing home, or rarely at home, but because they've been sick typically. And again, they ask. I just went through this with a friend of mine, and they asked who was going to pick up the body.
Right.
Because they can't, those beds have to be new people coming in.
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
You got, that person's gone, and that revenue stream is ended, and someone else has to fill that bed. And so here's a person's body,
Right.
and they're gone. And so what kind of decision making do you have at that point?
Yeah, again, it's like if someone told you you have to go out and buy a new car in the next 3 hours.
Yes. Where does that take you?
Right.
Where does that take?
Yeah.
So typically, you recommend that people get the necessary documents, pricing, all of that before this happens.
Yeah, the sooner you do it, the better. You just like doing your will and living will, plan ahead and go to the funeral homes and just say, look, this is what we want, and they'll give you an estimate and write things out for you.
So how does that work? I know that there is the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, has a rules regarding funeral pricing. And that is I remember the day when they didn't have the rule and you did not know what you were going to be paying for.
Right.
And so now they do have that rule in place.
Right, the FTC they have numerous regulations, but the most important is that they're required to give you a price list. So they have to give that to you. And all this came about because there was a lot of complaints about things happening in the funeral industry, and people were kind of taken advantage of and so on. And I should say this too, when I talk about this whole area, I don't have anything against funeral homes. Like you say, they're a business, they have to make money.
Yeah.
But my job is to help people save money.
Right.
So, and I've generally had pretty good experiences with funeral homes. But again, in terms of your planning, if you want to save money, you don't want to just walk in there after someone's passed away. You have to plan ahead and have some information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that you're not caught
Right.
unawares.
Right.
Yeah, because now the other thing I found very interesting is that you are not required to use a container, the casket, for cremation. You can use an
They
alternative.
call it alternative container. Yeah, I mean, so let's say you want to be cremated. Does it make sense to spend $2,000 on a casket and
That's gonna
it
get
goes through
burned.
there and gets burned up? So you can buy, it's basically like a cardboard type container. It's relatively inexpensive. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so I know that with a lot of the funeral homes, they do a full casket as a service, meaning you still have the body on display, and then cremation.
Right, and you can rent, and you would rent a casket for the display
Okay,
if
so
you
you
want to do
can
that.
rent a casket.
right.
That would have to be a lot less expensive.
Oh, sure. And you can also buy your own casket. Obviously, that's part of their business. They prefer to sell you a casket, but you have a right under the FTC's rule to buy your own casket. And if you go, search online, you can find cheaper caskets.
Well, I
you can
know
get
in
them at
my city,
Costco.
yeah, you can get them at Costco. I remember some years back, it was an odd feeling to see caskets, but the reality is that if you live on this earth, you're going to leave in a box or an urn.
Right.
Or based on all the information you provided me, you may leave on a spaceship.
Right.
You got all kinds
Oh,
of
sure,
options on how to read that as well. The other thing that I found very interesting and that I did not know is that embalming is not required.
Correct. Embalming is not required. And one of the things I've learned about this area too, we have certain things in our country we do that are very customary, embalming being one of them, which started back in the Civil War.
Why?
But
What
other
was the basis to keep the body
Well,
from being bacteria infested?
The Civil War was the first time, back then we were much more of a rural country.
Yeah.
And it was the first time where people were passing away not at home. People, the soldiers were hundreds of miles away, so that's why they started the embalming process. But think about 200 years ago, there was no funeral home industry.
There was
200 years ago, people passed away. They were just the body was at home in the parlor, and they had a service there,
Yeah.
and then they had a local cemetery, they buried them. So it was all, people actually did that themselves.
Okay. So are we coming back to that, perhaps?
Well, there is a little bit, in my area, I can't say there's much of a movement, but nationwide there is a bit of a home funeral movement. In other parts of the country, some people do want to do that.
So is there any state law requiring a funeral home to handle your...
I can't comment on all states, but I do know some states do require you to use a funeral home.
They do.
Other states do not.
Okay.
Ohio does not. Ohio law, you do not have to use a funeral home. You could have a home funeral if you want, and you could also, and I looked this up recently because this issue came up. The question was, can't you just transport the body yourself? And there's no law in Ohio that I'm aware of that says you can't. Now I warn people it's a little unusual. So
Yeah.
one, you have to have you do have to get a death certificate and a burial permit. But if you wanted to transport the body yourself, you can. But I
Well,
tell
the
people
death certificate comes from the coroner's office, correct? Or
Bureau of Vital Statistics.
Bureau of Vital Statistics?
And if you want to do it yourself, this is another area where I tell people if you want to do a home funeral, it's very hard to. It's not easy to do because you're kind of going against the system. But you have to go direct to the Columbus Bureau of Vital Statistics office, and you can't. There's a process for you to get the death certificate yourself.
You can do
So you
that
can do
yourself,
that, right.
but doesn't someone have to sign off, like a
The
coroner?
doctor would have to
would
sign it, yeah.
sign off that this person
Right.
died from
Right.
XX.
Right, and you could get that done. I want to finish up what I said too
Okay.
about the transporting yourself.
Yes,
I tell people
'cause
you
that's
want to
just-
make sure you have the death certificate and burial permit, and you need to be the person under the law that has what's called the right of disposition, either the document we talked about or you're the next of kin. Because if a police stops you, you
Oh, my
better
God.
explain what's going on.
What's
So,
going
yeah.
on in the back seat, yes. The other question I would have related to that is, and I've heard it, and again, this show airs in a lot of other parts of the United States, but there is a document now where you have to put in writing about cremation or a regular burial. Is there a document that is now that you have to sign that says that this is what you want?
Oh, yeah, in the appointment of representative document, one aspect is stating your wishes. Now, you don't have to, and I can tell you from talking to people, a lot of people ask, what are your special wishes? And a lot of people don't have any wishes, and they just say, whatever, my kids want, or my spouse.
But the disputing with the kids today is if you have one who does not believe in cremation, and another one who wants a very elaborate burial versus a very standard type of burial, how does that document address that?
Well, if you have a situation like that, then you need to say, this is what I want. And I'll tell you too, most people I ask, even if they say they don't have any special wishes, I'll say, well, do you want to be buried or cremated? Almost everybody will have an answer to that.
They will.
Not everyone, but most,
Okay.
I'd say 95% of the people. So certainly if you think there's a disagreement in your family, set out your wishes. But again, whoever you name, if you name your son Joe as the representative, then Joe would decide.
And if Joe does not adhere to your wishes, what happens?
Well, that's a good question. So if you state your wishes in there, let's say you say, I want to be buried at Calvary Cemetery, and you name Joe as your representative, and then Joe says, well, I want Dad cremated, someone else would have to speak up, and you could actually file something in probate court to contest that. So
could you?
it's not what you want to do, but, but if someone is going to do something against your express wishes, there's a legal procedure in probate court where someone can
challenge
contest
that.
Sure.
And now there is a very short window. So if
Well, you have to do it soon enough,
immediately.
Yes, well, you're right.
Yeah, if Joe says, I'm going to cremate, Dad said he wanted a full funeral, burial, and the sister says, I'm going to stay with what Dad wanted. I don't care what you are authorized to do. She'd have to kind of get that done quickly, wouldn't she?
Sure, yeah, you got to act quickly, obviously, before someone's cremated.
Yeah.
And that brings up a good point too. Part of planning for funeral burial is you want to respect the wishes of the deceased.
Right.
But you also want to respect the loved ones who are left, because they're the ones, and maybe someone wanted to do. One of my clients jokingly said, well, put me in my rowboat and put me down, roll me down the river and light it on fire. So he was joking, but obviously you wouldn't do that. Obviously the families, someone might want to do something a little odd, and if the family doesn't like it, then I think you got to respect their wishes too. So it's a little bit of a balance.
Okay. Well, I know that with this whole issue of contestability, most facilities do have refrigeration units. Listen, viewers, I don't want to sound morbid, but you need to know this stuff.
Well, not nursing homes.
Right, nursing homes don't.
Yeah, right. But hospitals do.
But hospitals do, and possibly mortuaries.
Oh, yeah. Some funeral homes have a unit and some don't, right?
Okay, so again, that's all a part of pre-planning.
Right.
You got to know who you're going to be dealing with.
And that gives you time to get
questions
things
asked,
done,
right?
too. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about another area, and that has to do with pre-need funeral plans. And I must be open with you and tell you that I was a strong advocate of getting all of the things put in place and done. It's under contract, it's funded, paid for, and then I read this. Would you expound?
Well, okay, so there's kind of two schools of thought on doing the prepaid funeral plan. So one is go in and you go over every detail and you prepay.
Okay.
And then that way everything's worked out.
And done.
And so that's an advantage. The disadvantages are, well, first of all, and I've done a little research on this, and when I've asked funeral homes about this, I say, now there's two options. You can have a guaranteed or a non-guaranteed contract. So I say, well, is this a guaranteed price? And most of them say no. And my response is, well, then why would I want to do this?
If it's not guaranteed.
I mean, if I'm 90 years old, okay, but if I'm younger,
right.
So my family's going to come in 10 years later and it's going to cost an extra $1,000. So I don't like the idea of not having it guaranteed. The disadvantage also is you have to pay ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, most people, you could pay cash.
Yes.
But you can also, what most people do is they assign their life, if they have a life insurance policy, they assign the rights to it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not out of pocket. That makes it easy. The thing I don't like about it is, what if you have a $100,000 policy
Mm-hmm.
and you've assigned that? Then what happens is, when you pass away, the money gets paid to the funeral home, and then you're waiting for a refund for the extra. Although I'll have to say, recently, I've just seen a couple occasions where the insurance company only paid the funeral home the amount of the bill.
Okay.
Which makes sense.
Right, rather than giving them a blanket.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the other option is to pre-plan but not prepay.
How does that work?
So you could just, so one, you would want to do the document I mentioned.
Okay.
The document, the appointment of representative and state your wishes. You could just go to the funeral home and just go over every detail and fill out the form, and you could then attach that to your appointment of representative document and say, this is what I want. And that way
Okay,
they know
that sounds easy.
You got every little detail on the funeral, and even if you pick the particular funeral home and say, this is what I want. And then,
Okay.
So you pre-planned and
And you can actually tell them this is what you want to spend under each line item?
yes, exactly.
Okay, so there's no misunderstanding
Yeah,
about that?
right.
Okay.
Right.
Now there's an area, and we'll get more into this at time permitting. If a person is on Medicaid, and of course, for those of you that don't know, Medicare, which is health care for seniors over 65 and over, and people that have been disabled and getting Social Security for at least 2 years, and renal failure, that is Medicare. It's a health care plan. Medicaid viewers has to deal with your inability to maneuver through what they call activities of daily living. And that could be the result of a chronic disease or illness, Alzheimer, heart problems, stroke, diabetes. And that is a government-funded program to pay for your care. There are stipulations and restrictions, and Mr. Millonig is an expert on that. But shifting into this funeral, if they're on Medicaid or anticipate being on Medicaid, how does that work?
If you're spending down, let's make a simple example. You're single, you're spending down, and you're in a nursing home, and you're eventually going to be on Medicaid. You have to spend down below $2,000.
Correct.
I'm giving a very simple example. There's more
Okay.
to it than that, but before you're out of money, you want to buy a prepaid funeral plan, because if you pass away with $2,000, there's no money to pay for your funeral. So that's a very common thing to do, and if you do that, you just have to make sure it's an irrevocable prepaid funeral plan. And
Okay.
the nursing homes understand that, or I'm sorry, the funeral homes understand that, because if it's irrevocable, then it's not a countable resource for Medicaid.
Okay.
Because if it was revocable and refundable, well, then that's like having
That's
money in the bank.
Right.
So-
Okay. I think that's the irrevocable component.
Right.
Where it cannot be canceled once the contract is executed. There you are.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
People need to know that.
Sure.
They really, really do. They need to know that. So typically, what happens, I'm just sharing with you what I did with my mother. And she didn't want to go to the family cemetery. She didn't want, she was very specific. My mother's an accountant, so you already know. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah. I want this, I don't want that. But we went on, and this is what she wanted. She had a very small, fully paid up insurance contract. And she just liquidated it. She did. Took the money based on what the funeral home had given her as an estimate. And when that money came, she went on and just paid for it. Everything. The cemetery, which is not a part of the funeral.
Right.
A lot of people don't know that, Mike.
Right.
They don't.
Yeah.
And she was done. But what you're saying is a lot of people make an assignment.
Of their, instead of having to write a check, people will assign their rights to they basically change the beneficiary on their life insurance contract, if they have a life insurance policy.
Do they have to change the beneficiary when they do an assignment?
Well, yeah, because it gets paid to the nursing home, or excuse me, funeral home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So they can do that. That would probably, that have to be in effect before they were dead, correct?
Yeah, that's part of doing the prepaid funeral plan.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they name the funeral home as
the beneficiary to get the
the
money.
beneficiary.
Yes.
I don't know if I like that.
Well, that's what I said before.
I don't know.
Well, I should mention one other thing too. Let's say you do pay cash.
Yes.
They're required to they don't put that in their business account. They're required to put it in a separate bank trust type account where it's segregated. So if for some reason the funeral home went out of business, your money is still protected. But you want to follow up and just make sure that happens, because there have been instances, and it shouldn't happen, but it does.
Yeah.
Some funeral homes have not put that money where it's supposed to go, and then they've gone out of business, and people lost money on that.
So what is the state's position on that? Because this was a big issue. I remember in the 1980s and 90s, this was a big issue. And I say that because people were losing their money.
Right.
And the state came in and regulated this whole thing, I thought.
Well, right, that's what the law now says, right, since the time you mentioned. So the Ohio law requires, and most states have a similar law, require the money, if it's actual money, to be paid into a separate bank account.
Okay.
And it's a trust bank account. It's separate from the business account.
Okay.
But I'm just saying.
But still, buyer beware.
I know it's happened in this area not too many years ago, where a funeral home didn't put the money where they were supposed to. So you want to make sure that's done.
Okay, and how would you follow up with that?
You would just contact the funeral home and say, I want verification of where these funds are deposited, and then contact the bank yourself.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
got it.
It'll be a separate bank account.
Okay, so does that account, is that an interest-bearing account, or is that just a flat?
It is an interest-bearing account.
Okay.
And that's another issue they bring up, because I said, well, if I prepay this, if the price is going to be bigger later, how does that help me? They say, well, if it's put in and they say insurance policy, because if you do pay cash, actually a lot of times what they do is they actually buy a separate new policy.
Oh, okay.
And they say, well, that can grow. I don't know how much
I
it
don't
grows.
know,
Well, that's what
because-
they've told me.
Okay.
I don't know if it's going to grow like the stock market, but that's what they.
Yeah, because the purpose of insurance is not to increase equity.
Right.
I mean,
But when they do put the money in an insurance policy, this is when you buy one, a separate policy, it does have some growth component.
okay, yeah, the cash, yeah, if it's a participating insurance, it would.
But that's their counter argument to me,
Okay.
saying, if you aren't giving me a guaranteed price, why do I want to get this?
Right.
So,
And so they say,
But the other argument is you could take money, you could put $6,000 in a separate bank account,
Yes.
or maybe a stock account.
Yeah.
And you could name one of your children as the beneficiary and say, this is for my funeral. So
Got
you
it.
could do that too.
okay, but I think, and at least it was my experience with her, and it was an enlightening experience, because the gentleman who was across the table representing the funeral home and myself, I was like, I know your business, because he said, Michelle, this is real straightforward. I said, it just better be, because that's my mother sitting there, and anything that you have not fully disclosed is an automatic turn down, and we're leaving. This is America. I'll find somebody else.
yeah.
But it did, I believe, because it was a guaranteed contract, and I set it up at that time as an irrevocable contract because of my anticipation of things possibly changing. So I went on and took care of that. But basically, the concerns that you've expressed around stability of the carrier and these things are things that consumers need to know.
Sure.
hey folks, jury is out. Mike believes
Yeah.
what he believes,
Yeah.
and he's right.
Yeah.
I believe what I believe,
Yeah.
and I'm right. But he has brought up some excellent points, particularly with regard to the money and the fact that insurance companies will not pay out to the mortuary anything.
Well, I don't know if that's for sure. I just seen it happen recently.
You did.
In the past, what I've always seen is they pay the whole amount to the funeral home, and then you get the refund of the balance from them.
Now, you know that's kind of scary.
Well, it is a little scary.
I'm not kidding. If you have a $100,000 whole life contract and your funeral only costs 10, that's
Yeah,
$90,000.
it really doesn't make sense to sign that whole thing.
I just
Yeah, no, it doesn't make
can't see myself
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. If it's just a little bit more than the actual cost, then that's not too bad. But yeah.
Well, I know that you made reference about within your industry, it's again the belief system that it's okay to pre-plan, but exercise caution on
Prepaying, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think there's pros and cons. Again, if you prepay, then it's just all done, and you just walk in there.
Yep, that's what I'm
So-
hoping. I'm hoping in
Yeah.
10 years or whenever she does transition that it's that seamless. I've tried to cover every possible contingency.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like I said, I was at a funeral yesterday, and you just won't believe.
Yeah.
I just sat there with my mouth wide open. I could not believe. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I just could not believe it.
Let me say something about funerals too, and this is one that, for the most part, when I talk about this, I try to be objective, and
Yes.
because people have different opinions and feelings. The one thing I am, and this is on my website, on the very top of my
Which is,
funeral page.
yeah.
The website is just my name, michaelmillonig.com.
Okay, no J, just Michael Millonig.
Millonig.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So I do have an opinion that I think it's important that everybody have some type of funeral service. It doesn't have to be at a funeral home. It could just be something, just a little something by the gravesite. It could be the old-fashioned thing where you go to the family's house and have a little potluck meal or something. So I think some small service I think is important for everybody, because I know some people, friends and families, a few situations where they didn't have anything.
Nothing.
And it was I just thought it's kind of disrespectful. I think everybody
Yeah.
deserves a little something. And I know people are worried about money, but again, you could, if nothing else, you could rent a community space, or if you belong to a church, a lot of churches will let you just use their
They will,
community
with-
space,
right.
Or again, someone's home or something like that. So there are ways to do that are inexpensive.
Well, I know 2 years ago, I'm one of my fellow gardeners. We both belong to the same society for gardeners, and she actually died completely unexpectedly from a medication change. She changed doctors, and her new doctor changed her medication, and within 24 hours she had died.
Oh my.
I couldn't believe it. And the family was an estranged family, and of course I know you can give me lots of horror stories about estranged families, but she had substantial assets, and I'm telling you, they did nothing. She literally, I don't even know where her remains are. I got a little tree from her house that she had said, if I ever go, you can have the tree. And they put the tree on the outside of the house, and I picked the tree up. But I don't know, there was never a funeral. There was never a final going away. And it just felt weird.
It's unsatisfying.
It was.
Well, I tell people too. So in a close family where you have maybe a spouse or kids, they may say, well, we don't want to have a funeral, and Dad didn't want one, but there's other people.
Yeah.
There's other family.
I want to say
and there's
goodbye.
friends,
Yeah.
And you have to think about their feelings also.
Right. I think that's a very sensitive point. And for those of you viewing, I hope that that's not a consideration, to have nothing to reflect on the life of an individual. A memorial can be anywhere. It just do it, because you would want it done for you. All of us have merit. All human beings, I mean, even in animal kingdom, they respect their dead. They do. And there's something to be said about that. So we move from the issue of the funeral, which is, I got this. I got everything disclosed. I'm comfortable with how I have to pay for this. I have the funds to pay for it. I understand that the funeral home is not the cemetery. Right? Right. Okay. And the cemetery has its own expenses and costs. Are you required to use a vault?
Most cemeteries require that, and their reason is, so let me explain that. So you have a coffin, a casket with the body's in.
Right.
But they don't just put that in the ground. You have to have another a container they call a burial vault around that. And the reason they say is because when they mow the lawn, it has to be even. Otherwise, they say the ground will sink in.
Oh, wow.
I saw something interesting. I can't remember if it was on the internet or TV, but there's also another method of natural burials, and this person who's at the cemetery said, well, we use a simple method. We just put more dirt on top. And I thought, well, that's common sense, so you don't hear that often.
You don't hear that often. That is very...
So in most cemeteries, you do have to have a vault, yes.
Which is a cement type of thing?
It's usually concrete, I think.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay. And the casket goes in
inside
there.
That, right.
And the purpose is to keep it from collapsing over time.
The ground, right.
The ground,
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a separate expense.
Well, yeah, it's another expense.
That's another, and they don't take insurance. They take cash or a credit card.
Well, that can be part of the prepaid funeral plan.
I didn't know that.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
that can be, well, in two ways. One, we talked about how there's a law governing prepaid funeral plans.
Right.
There's also a separate similar law governing prepaid cemetery goods and services.
Really?
So you could do that separately, or sometimes the funeral homes will incorporate that into the plan also.
Okay.
So that can
so
be
you
done.
can do blanket all of that
Right,
in
that can
under
be done.
one
Right.
price.
Right.
Okay. And that includes your headstone.
Right.
Yeah.
All that.
All
everything.
that.
Sure.
Golly Moses. I tell you, it's an expensive business dying.
It is.
I mean, it is. The leaving Earth
Yes.
is expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
And would you also just comment as a side, is there such a thing anymore as, what is it where they bury people and they didn't have any money? What are those things called? I thought where indigents can go.
Well, I know what you're talking about. Well, but here's the answer to your question, because I've asked about this. I've called the city. And
Okay.
So what happens with homeless people?
Right. Where
And
do
'cause
they go?
Some people, if they're homeless, or some people that are just indigent, and they may not have any close family. Well, first of all, the city checks that out. They want to see if there is any family or if they have any funds.
Okay.
If they don't, then the city pays for it, and they have a contract with someone who picks up the body, and then they cremate the bodies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they disperse the cremains.
I think that's a good question. I believe they keep those somewhere. I'm not sure. I believe
Okay.
they keep those somewhere.
Okay.
You're thinking of a Potter's Fieldings.
I'm thinking of a Potter's Field or
that's
something.
a term that's been used.
Yeah,
but,
something
but no,
like
but they
that.
don't. The indigent people don't know. That's an expense to bury them somewhere. So no, they don't. At least around the Dayton, Ohio area, and I'm pretty sure anywhere else, I don't think they do that anymore.
Okay. So they don't have.
They use cremation.
Just
By the
cremation.
way, cremation has increased greatly in the last 10, 20 years. I think the statistic I saw last in the paper was, I think it's about 50% of the people are cremated now.
Well, I think a lot of that, and early on, this goes back actually over 20 years ago, I was involved with the National Funeral Directors Association, which is the umbrella organization for all of them. And at that time, that industry was in disbelief about cremation. California was sounding the alarm, and so was Florida.
Sure.
Florida, because seniors were down there, and they didn't have family, and they just wanted something real quick and simple and cheap. And California, because the families were like, we're not paying that kind of money.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna do mom, scatter her remains or his remains, and we're gonna keep this money.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what's behind that. It's cheaper, obviously. I read where back in the late 1800s, cremation was first kind of a new idea, and people were horrified by it. They thought it was awful.
Right.
So it's taken 100 or more years, I guess, to catch on. But
Right.
I think the cost is the driving factor. People have to remember too, because sometimes I'll ask people what their wishes are, and they say for funeral burial, and they say, "Oh, we're getting cremated."
Okay,
And
but
I
you
have to
still.
say, "Wait a minute, stop." But you can still have a funeral memorial service
Right.
without the body.
Right,
So
right.
people don't think about that. And they also have to think. Then I say, well, what do you want done with the remains?
Right.
Because you can have those buried in a regular grave, or they have columbariums, or
Right.
some people want them
Exploding
scattered
industry,
somewhere.
yeah.
So you still have to think about. If you just say I want to be cremated, that's not the end of the discussion.
Yeah, it goes on. And I've even been told that you cannot no longer scatter your cremains. There are state laws with regard to that.
One of the things people have to, you can do that, but it's if you just go to like if I went, for example, if I went to your yard and I just dumped my trash can on your yard, that would be that wouldn't be right, and it would actually be a trespass.
Yes.
So it's the same thing with remains. You can't just go dump them at even if it's a public park or a national park where some people like to do that. You have to get permission to do that. And the national parks have a procedure for that.
For you scattering remains in a
remains.
national
Right,
park.
right.
What about the state? There's some
Well,
lovely.
the same thing. They don't necessarily all have procedures, but it is a trespass, and you can't just go scatter them anywhere you want. You have to get either the private or public property owner's permission.
to do that.
Right. And in some parks they may tell you no, you can't.
Because I can imagine that would get to be a little bit cumbersome
Sure.
as more and more people are being cremated and want their ashes buried or scattered.
Right. And they don't, well, and I know, for example, Yellowstone Park, they have rules. They don't want it. You can't go dump them in Old Faithful. They want them off of a path and so on. So
Right.
And by the way, your ashes, they call them, it's really your crushed bones is what's.
That's
left,
all
by
it
the way,
is, yeah. Because the flesh immediately inflames, and then you're stuck with these bone fragments. Yeah. But so we are looking now at these cemeteries, and what if you have a complaint about what they're doing, or what you feel is unfair?
Well, and I get a fair number of calls about that. Cemeteries, they aren't really that highly regulated. We talked about the FTC regulating prepaid funeral plans. There's not a lot of regulation. That they do have to be licensed and so on, but mostly they're governed by their own rules and regulations.
So is that their own internal or association when you say rules and regulations?
Their own. The cemeteries has their own rules and regulations on what you can do and so on. And they have rules about leaving flowers and so on.
Do they?
How long you can leave them.
Each facility, or is this a governing body?
Well, whoever owns the cemeteries can be owned by private companies for profit.
Really?
Some of them are religious.
Okay.
Others are a non-religious nonprofit company, or they can be publicly owned, government owned. So there's a wide variety, but they generally, as a legal matter, they're generally governed by, really you would say, contract law, by whatever you agree to whatever their rules are, basically.
Okay, so even down to maintenance, and I talked to you before we went on set, the biggest issue I am concerned about is when you look at cemeteries that are poorly maintained, or there's nothing going on, weed overgrowth, etc. These are older facilities. What is being done today to keep that from occurring?
Well, a cemetery, if it's well run, has to have a good long-term financial plan so they're sustainable.
Okay.
Because, I mean, these, we could be talking 1, 2, 300 years from now. they have to have enough funds so that someday they'll be all full.
Okay.
So someday they're full and they're not getting new money coming in, so they have to have accumulated and saved money so that they have enough money to maintain the cemetery.
Yes.
Now, have they all done that? No, they haven't. And some of them just go financially, out of business, so to speak. So.
And then if they are out of business, the state reluctantly comes in.
Well, I'll give an example of what are called pioneer cemeteries. If
Yes.
you drive around almost any county or state, there's some old kind of decrepit cemeteries, and the people were buried back there in the 1800s.
Okay.
And they're pioneer cemeteries. There wasn't a financial plan
Right.
for a long term.
Right.
And what happens is the city or township, county takes those over.
Okay.
And of course, that's a governmental expense then.
And they have to maintain
Right.
it. Okay. That makes perfectly good sense.
Yeah,
I know that.
And there's an Ohio law I know that requires if a cemetery's been abandoned that the city or township has to take it over.
To take it over and maintain. Well, that should be a relief for families, because I know when I drive by a cemetery that does not look kept, that's the question I always ask myself: did they run out of money?
Right.
And they're now going through this.
Right.
Not a real good situation. What about veterans?
Well, veterans have various rights. I have a book, it must be 1,500 pages of veterans' rights, but if you're a veteran, in terms of our topic here today, you have a right to get buried at a veteran cemetery, and right to a headstone and a flag and so on. So,
Yes,
and
yes.
you don't have to be buried, in a cemetery,
But you
but
can.
you
And is
can.
there a charge?
If you're buried at a veteran cemetery, no, there's no charge. And then as a veteran, even if you want to be buried at a private cemetery, they pay for the headstone. So,
They do pay
yes.
for the headstone.
Yes.
But they don't pay for the funeral.
Oh, no, not the funeral service.
Yeah,
no,
but they
no.
do pay for that
Right.
the headstone.
Right.
And again, I've seen from time to time the military
Right.
coming
Yeah.
in as well.
And before we finish up, I want to mention on my website, I have a checklist of planning for funerals in two scenarios. One is if you're planning it, after someone's passed away, or if you're planning ahead of time. And hopefully that checklist helps people.
Can you give your phone number and the website?
Oh, yeah, the website's just www.michaelmillonig.com. And
Okay.
then our office is 937-438-3977.
Okay, can you say that number, telephone number,
Ni-
slowly?
937-438-3977. I'll just mention a few things on the checklist. One, first of all, planning a funeral, you have to take into account the person's customs, religious or otherwise, their desires, and so on. That's always kind of the starting point. And then second, obviously budget.
Right,
Some
how
people
much-
have plenty of money and they don't mind spending $15,000 on a funeral,
Right.
which isn't hard to do, but you have to take into account the budget.
Right.
And then the next thing to do is just to go to the funeral homes and sit down with them and get their price list and see what it's going to cost. And I tell people, if it's right after someone passed away, don't decide then. Just say, I'm going to go home and just think about it.
Right.
And I also say, take someone with you, maybe who's a little more objective. So if you're the spouse, you'll have your kids with you, but maybe your brother or your neighbor, someone you know who's maybe maybe kind of responsible, has some business experience, who might just maybe interrupt and say, well, maybe you shouldn't do this.
Right.
So just, take a little time
That's
and
my
do that.
concern, because death takes you into a different place in terms of grieving and ability to make sound decisions. And you're right, I don't believe a person should go alone. And that be careful with your family
Sure.
as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also too on the service, and again, I'm not saying it's funeral homes, but if you want to save money, just think about having an actual service, whether you call it a memorial service without the body or a funeral or a service. Have it again at a church or a community place that might be cheaper. So.
Well, viewers, this has been interesting. I told you it would be. Now you know a little bit more. Key thing, see the attorney before all of this happens, and make sure you're dealing with a estate planning attorney. It's kind of like doctors versus oncologists. If you got cancer, you don't want to be with a general practitioner, you want to be with oncologists. Same thing with heart. These are specialties, and Mike is a specialist. He's done this for many, many years and is familiar with the terrain. So I hope you've enjoyed this segment. I've certainly enjoyed learning, and here's to only the best for you and your family, and I look forward to you joining me for the next segment where we're going to talk about protecting your assets from nursing home seizure. Yeah, that's a big one. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye. I'm going back in that room.